Okay, I think we're ready to go just about. Awesome. Welcome everybody. Never quite sure in these situations who can see and hear, so I'm just going to start talking. The time is on. Welcome so much to everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. This is the first in a new series of Trans-Tasman webinars brought to you by ThincLab Adelaide and ThincLab Canterbury, as we launch a really exciting partnership to activate connections, share knowledge, and foster growth across our borders. My name is Olivia. I'm the Program Manager here at ThincLab Canterbury, and I'll be facilitating our online session today. So we have an hour, and we've got a pretty inspiring lineup. We'll hear first from the respective leads for the entrepreneurship departments at both the University of Adelaide and the University of Canterbury, before we take a deep dive into the high growth sector for both regions, health tech. Our panel is comprised of guest speakers from both Adelaide in Australia and Christchurch in New Zealand, two gentlemen leading organisations at the forefront of innovation in health tech, and two women who are paving the way to commercialisation of such technologies. In future webinars, we'll continue to deep dive into other key growth areas for our regions, including agri-tech and innovations in future food and fibre. But for now, let's get this session started. And I'd like to introduce our first speaker and offer a really warm welcome to Professor Noel Lindsay, Pro Vice Chancellor for Entrepreneurship and the Dean of Adelaide Business School at the University of Adelaide. Welcome, Noel.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Well, good morning, everyone from South Australia and New Zealand, including those who have joined us via live stream. A big welcome to the first webinar in our Activating Trans-Tasman Growth series. Before I discuss today's webinar, I would also like to acknowledge that we are celebrating the launch of ThincLab Canterbury. This represents a partnership between the University of Adelaide and the University of Canterbury. And so I would like to warmly welcome the University of Canterbury to the ThincLab Business Innovation and Support Network. This network spans from Adelaide, including our ThincLab Adelaide City and ThincLab Wright Innovation Hubs, to ThincLab Loxton in regional South Australia, to ThincLabs in France, Singapore, and now New Zealand. ThincLab Canterbury is the sixth ThincLab to be established in the ThincLab network, which is incredible. It's launching at a time, of course, when innovation and entrepreneurship are more important than ever, as we need to think and act very differently in the current rapidly changing and challenging environment. In conjunction with the 5 other ThincLab business incubators, ThincLab Canterbury will support and connect local businesses in South Australia and New Zealand with the world, and will help them to internationalise and remain open for business. So that's a little about the ThincLabs. Let me talk a little about today's webinar, which will focus on the opportunities and challenges for business startups in the health and medtech sectors in both Australia and New Zealand. This is a particularly important and fascinating topic, as all of us have been affected by COVID-19 in some way. And it is a particularly challenging time for those in the health industry, yet it is also one of opportunity. As they say, there's always opportunity in adversity. COVID-19 has impacted businesses in an extraordinary way in both our cities and regions, and we now need to rebuild our economies by assisting new and existing businesses to innovate. Hence, ThincLab Canterbury and ThincLab Network. And so to discuss today's topic, I would like to introduce the amazing panel that we have with us today. And in no particular order, first from Australia, we have Dr. Jonathan Hall, co-founder of Life Whisperer, a previous ThincLab Adelaide occupant who've gone on, expanded and gone on to do other things. Next, we have Aisha Sirop, Commercialisation Manager rather, from the University of Adelaide. And from our New Zealand partners, we have Anya Hornsey. She's the Innovation Director from Via Innovations. And we also have Jamie Cairns, who's the CEO from TASKA Prosthetics. So that's it from me. I'd now like to welcome my colleague, Dr. Rachel Wright, who is the Director of the Centre for Entrepreneurship at the University of Canterbury, who will now say a few words. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Noel. Great to see you. I wish it was in person. It's been a while. I thought I would have been to Adelaide a few times by now at this time of the year, but anyway, I love your background too, by the way. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of say a few words to say how excited and to be part of the ThincLab network. This has been a few years in the making. Some of you are probably wondering why and how this came to be. So Adelaide and Christchurch, where University of Canterbury is based, are sister cities, and they've been sister cities for 50 years now. So we have a really long-standing relationship with Adelaide. I was there a couple of years ago with the Mayor to celebrate the 50-year sister city sort of occasion, and it was pretty apparent how similar the two cities are. We're roughly the same size. We're slightly off the beaten track from the big cities such as Auckland, Melbourne, Sydney, and we're a mess. You know, we have ag, a strong focus, wine, and other industries are very, very similar. Health is another big one, and it sort of occurred to me how, for me, Adelaide is just slightly ahead of where Christchurch is. So for me, the transformation Adelaide has gone through in the last 5-10 years is pretty striking, and I think Christchurch can definitely do the same. University of Canterbury and University of Adelaide have a really long-standing relationship. Back in February 21, when the earthquakes hit here in Christchurch, Adelaide, within, like, I think it was 2 weeks, basically took hundreds of our students just took them on so they could do their studies there for a semester. They just opened their arms and said, yes, we'll take your students. From that, I've been going to visit Noel and his team and expanding our relationship between the two business schools. And through that, it was sort of occurred, well, they've got a great incubator. We're setting up an incubator. Why reinvent the wheel? Why not join that network and share expertise across the Tasman and sort of make it so it's transformative, so rather than iterative. So we're really excited to be part of this network. We're excited about the opportunities it's going to provide our companies with the access to Adelaide and beyond. And we're also excited how it's going to help our students and staff as well at the university. So we're looking forward to where this incubator network is going to take us all. And we're really hoping that we're going to be able to host Noel and his team here in Christchurch sometime before 2022. So yes, so over to you, Olivia.
Olivia, you're on mute.
I am. Thank you so much, Noel. Thank you, Noel and Rachel, again, for those warm introductions. And just to echo the sentiment that we really are looking forward to activating the partnership. The fact that we can do this the way that we are today online and still be hearing and sharing information is pretty cool, but very much looking to that day when we can be in the same room and also more of our companies and students are benefiting from what it is that we have to offer. So just how things will run today, I'm just going to have some brief introductions from the panellists. They have an opportunity from their own point of view to express who they are and what they do and how they fit into this picture. And then we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive. And I have some quite specific questions to ask these individuals, but would encourage participants as well, our audience, to submit questions. We'll try and save those toward the end. And I've got my eye on those questions, so I can take note of those and bring them in toward the end. But equally, if there's something that's really on point and very current, I'll try and keep my eye on that and bring those questions through. So yeah, let's crack on with these panelists. I'd like to start with Dr. Jonathan Hall, co-founder of Life Whisperer, and welcome you, Jonathan, to share a little bit about yourself, your background, and what brings you here today.
Hi, thanks so much, Olivia. So my name's Dr. Jonathan Hall, and I have a background in theoretical physics. Retrained in embryo nanotechnology, and so that was a bit of a pivot into health science engineering area, but not really. But I knew a lot of health science people, And so the way I come to entrepreneurship is because I was working at the University of Adelaide in one of the government centres that spans across Australia, and we had this really great idea that didn't fit within the scope of our studies, and it was so awesome, and I thought that I would just leave university and then do it at the end. But I enrolled in this really great program called the E-Challenge, which is run by Zorinka, who's an amazing person involved in ThincLab, and it was so exciting, and this idea really got some momentum, and we won some prizes. So the idea was about helping people to be able to have children more easily with a special new innovative technology that can identify, using very clever and very sophisticated techniques, what is a healthy embryo to implant when people are going through IVF and are suffering from fertility diseases. And so it was a cool idea, and we just gave so much of my heart into this. And so we started these companies, dual medical companies called Life Whisperer and Precigen, which are a series of linked companies involved in medical technology. And it's got a lot of interest, and it's got a lot of innovation involved, including MIT Tech Review, which has picked it up and also gave me a prize. So there's lots of very wonderful things that have happened because of that, and I'm just really excited about where that can go as an entrepreneurial journey and the companies, and how we can, as the main point, like help people in this area, which is such a personal area for so many people.
Absolutely. Gosh, thanks, Jonathan. What really occurs to me is that alongside the deep technology that that you guys are working on is the profound impact that it has on human lives in a very deep and personal way. So really looking forward to hearing a bit more about the impact that you're having there. Next, it'll be great to hear from Aisha Sirop, the Commercialisation Manager at the University of Adelaide.
Hello, good morning everyone. Thank you for having me on board for this event. I'm very excited to have joined the University of Adelaide in May this year. Despite COVID and everyone working from home, I was very welcomed and really benefited from having worked very closely with the E-Challenge team and ThincLab for the past 10 years, I think. So previously to coming to University of Adelaide, I was at Flinders University for about 13 years. Initially working in the commercialisation area for environmental biotech and clean tech type technologies. And in the last 6.5 years, I had the privilege to join the Medical Device Partnering Program as their Innovation Manager, which brings me here today in the sense that I've been exposed to up to between 50 and 100 different sort of new medtech ideas for startup companies, for clinicians and students, in all kinds of inventors or even established companies coming to us with brand new ideas for rehabilitation devices, surgical instrumentation, implants, the whole spectrum of medtech. And my job was to make sure that they were paired with the very best biomedical engineers in Adelaide from any of the universities, with the best local manufacturers that could help them, the best patent attorneys, and come up with a very best, well-considered design and prototype that will be closer to the minimal viable product and the made out of the material that's most likely to be used in hospital. Having been through that journey, we've gone national. The MDP went national, and it linked us up very well with all the local sort of national investment that the government has made in medtech in the last year or so, in the order of, I think, $5 billion over 10 years. So medtech has been a very hot topic, as Jonathan as well will probably know, in the last year, but has been very, very well supported in the last 6 to 7 years, I would say.
It's fantastic. Thanks so much for that background, Aisha. Again, really looking forward into your insights into exactly how it is that we bring these approaches practically to helping our startups. Next, I'd like to welcome Jamie Cairns, CEO of TASKA Prosthetics.
Hi, everybody. I must admit I feel a little bit inadequate in face of the academic prowess we see on the panel today. I must admit my 3-year degree turned into 5 years, and you know, it's only been over the last couple of years I've been more engaged now with the university than I ever was in my undergrad degree, unfortunately. My background after I left university, I spent a long time in information technology and telco, particularly overseas in the UK market. That ICT bent has really been with me since that point. I spent a long time working with the Ministry of Defence over there before coming back to New Zealand. I ran a small telecommunications company here, then went to Vodafone, the big giant, before realising that corporate life definitely wasn't for me. And then another couple of startups, and I'm now the CEO at TASKA Prosthetics. TASKA produces myoelectric prosthetic hands. So essentially what we're doing is we're helping upper limb amputees. It's a real mix of medtech and robotics and IT and just everything really thrown into one melting pot. And on top of that, we are now selling 99% of our products into the international market, into the US and Europe predominantly. So again, we've got those challenges of being a technology company based down here in the Southern Hemisphere, selling into that ginormous client base up there in North America. So that's a little bit about what we do. Just looking forward to hearing from everybody else.
It's fantastic. Thanks so much, Jamie. Yeah, again, looking forward to seeing how you're actually bringing the different technologies together. I think obviously we've got a health tech focus today, but none of these things, you know, operate in isolation. So how it is that we bring the different disciplines in will be really interesting to investigate as well, let alone those international markets. And then finally, I'd really like to welcome Anya Hornsey, who's the Innovation Director at Via Innovations, which is our District Health Board's innovation commercialisation pathway. Thanks, Anya.
Kia ora koutou. Yes, so we're a small business unit within the Canterbury District Health Board and or CDHB. And CDHB is one of 20 district health boards across the country that are funded by central government to deliver public health care. So CDHB is the second largest nationally in terms of population and area, and employs over 10,000 staff and manages contracts across primary, secondary and tertiary healthcare sectors. So it serves a population of over 550,000 and has 5 major hospital facilities and almost 30 smaller rural hospitals and community bases. So our team's core focus is fostering innovation within the CDHB and across the wider Canterbury health system. We connect ideas to industry, we connect innovators to investors, and we connect health to enterprise. We're the first point of contact for CDHB employees to help clarify the intellectual property position, to carry out preliminary market and competitor landscape searches, to support qualifying adventures through to proof of concept validation, to make industry and investor connections, and to facilitate access to commercialisation expertise in the wider innovation ecosystem here. And internal projects that have commercial potential beyond the CDHB, we can sponsor up to the New Zealand Health Innovation Hub, which is a CDHB entity with access to government co-funding and commercial support that each of the New Zealand DHBs can use. But we also engage with external local health tech innovators to help facilitate validation of new products, processes and systems in a hospital setting where there's strong alignment with our KPIs. We're very fortunate to have an executive within the CDHB, Stella Ward, who's the Chief Digital Officer and also heads up the innovation portfolio. She's a well-recognised leader in healthcare innovation in the sector, and that's great support for us. So for me, I've been with the CDHB for a whole of 9 months, and I'm still fairly new to the public healthcare system. So the observations I'll share later are from a new to sector perspective, but I hope they'll provide some useful insights. And prior to joining Via Innovations, I spent over 15 years in technology startup sector, including 10 years as an IP manager and investment manager for a tech incubator and investment company where we commercialised technologies from Canterbury universities. And this included some very early stage, some directorships and even a stint as a startup CEO, just to make sure I had a really good grounding in all the challenges from tech startups from all angles. Thanks, Olivia.
It's fantastic. Thanks, Anya. I like that well-rounded approach, and something that really resonates for me is the connectivity that both yourself and Aisha are providing, really joining the dots between the different providers and organisations and what have you. So what is super exciting is that as we join up between Adelaide and Canterbury, we can actually we can really amplify those connections. So that's just, that's awesome. So now let's move into some questions. I did have a question on our Q&A, but it's been kindly answered by Noel. Rachel, if you wanted to add anything to that, we had a question around 3 key opportunity areas for focus between either Adelaide and Canterbury or Australia and New Zealand. Did you have any thoughts to add on that?
So obviously health, healthcare, that's why we're here today. Health tech, other area is food, fiber, ag, and wine, and aerospace. I would say three very overlapping opportunities where we've both got strong, fast-growing industries.
That's awesome, thank you. And I think fair to say, as I mentioned earlier, those are areas that we absolutely intend to do our further webinars on as time goes on. All right, let me find these questions that I had prepared earlier. Looking forward to asking them and getting a bit more detail. So if we can start with yourself, Jonathan, I'd really like to know from your perspective, what's the biggest opportunity you have seen that helped get the ball rolling for you and your companies? Yeah,
look, it's been such an interesting journey, and so thinking back as to what helps get the ball rolling, I find that when we try and step out and do things, it's often really hard, and so it's it's really hard to understand whether people are interested, whether it's going to be something that's going to get traction. But for us, the biggest opportunity we really found was that it was something that was so different, but at the same time, so it was new, but it was also, it immediately helped people, but yet also kind of reduced costs. So it has this strange combination of instantly being recognizable as a really, and this is in health tech space, health, a real benefit and something that was new that didn't exist yet, and that people could really clearly see how it would help. It wasn't a mystery how it would help. And that it also had the knock-on effect of also helping to reduce cost for people, because IVF is so expensive, and if you have a better, faster outcome, you don't have to pay as much. So it had all of these different aspects that kind of made it real fresh, and that just got a lot of interest. It was really clear to explain. You didn't have to go through a lot of complicated explanations to say, what is it doing? And that, I think, was one of the reasons why it just had picked up quite a bit of impetus, because people were really excited about the fact that, this was a thing that could, could we even do it? Is this possible? Oh my gosh, if this could work. And once people were like, oh my gosh, if this could work, then people start thinking, oh, well, let's try and do it. And so that was kind of the real feel about how it became an opportunity that people were willing to think about and back and were excited about.
Great insights and reflections on that. And it occurs to me as well that it goes back to that absolute truth around a good startup, which that there is a problem to solve, and that problem really resonates for a lot of people. So the fact that you're able to make a difference is pretty exciting. It must have been very validating for you. Another question for you, Jonathan, and I guess it comes back to being a startup. What's been the biggest challenge that you have found so far in operating as a startup?
One thing, well, I should actually say a couple of things that caught me off guard that as being very, very difficult challenges that actually required me to become better and become a better person at what I do, to be able to understand how to do that. And that was teams and people. So teams and people was one real aspect, how you work together with teams. Different people have different personalities that don't always get on, and how do you learn to the continual game of communicating with them, getting them to communicate easily with each other, being able to smooth things over and grow teams so that there's trust, and that when mistrust forms, they're solved easily. And that comes part and parcel, that's on the inside, and on the outside comes part and parcel with sales, which is something that I can't say that we've figured out entirely as a hard game, which is communication as well. But what is a customer? Who are the customers, and the customers that are actually the influencers of the customer? And we have clinics and we have patients, and the patients are not our direct customers, and the clinics are another main customer. So we have these relationships. How do you communicate value, the value that they want? And they're different people, so they want different things. So how do you communicate that value to them? How do you measure how well you're communicating to those people? So that communication, people management inside of the companies and outside is the thing that I found really such a challenge that I felt like I had to become better to be able to take that on.
Fully appreciate both of those reflections, and I imagine that every company has their fair share, regardless of size, around those team dynamics and fully understanding your market, particularly if it is a complex market with more than one party. So just to probe into that a little bit further, what would be one thing that you implemented or that you would suggest others might actually do that worked for you to better communicate or create that understanding between your team and then your markets?
I want to say first off that I'm still on that journey, so I can't say that it solves all world's problems, because I feel like I'm only on the sort of 10% step of the journey. But what I have learned was, and I think this is something that no one ever really thinks about or does or says, but that is to spend more time than you think to just work on yourself and your own personal development. Because if you are a valuable person giving into a company, and your value reflects in everything that you talk, everything you do, every person you talk to. So working on how you are going to show up, even to yourself when no one's looking, that's the hardest one. And then how you're going to show up to other people as well in that same way consistently, and working on spending more time on yourself than the business. And it sounds selfish, but it's not really, because you are the person who's giving out. And if you don't have anything to give, then it doesn't work. And if you're not giving in the right way. So working on yourself, personal development, reading the certain books that are about that, or podcasts that are about that, or some of the literature that's out there is very helpful for some of the famous literature that, and people, and working on those things in yourself.
I think it's a great way to look at it. And it really goes back to that very clear instruction on an airplane: please put on your mask before you try and put masks on for others. And it probably flies in the face, as you become a leader and you have more people that you're accountable for, that you give. And so I like that advice, that on balance, in order to be able to give, you've got to give to yourself.
You can only do that if you've got stuff to give. So if you get run ragged, now you are low, and now you can't even give, and now you are suddenly projecting that negativity. So you have to have a full cup to be able to spill out onto other people.
Fully agree. That's great. Thank you, Jonathan. Aisha, I might just move over to you and get a few insights from yourself. I've got a question here around the level of support and investment that's available for medtech, that sector in Adelaide and Australia. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so like I was saying before, I feel like the state government and the federal government has put a lot of money into medtech in the last few years. I was at the very early stage, I guess, development of medtech. So with the Medical Device Partnering Program, it's been supported for about 10 years now by state government, and they've got a team in South Australia and one in Victoria. So they're trying to expand and go national with the support of the federal government and state government in each state. So with that type of program, people can go to them as end users, doctors, clinicians, small companies, startup companies that feel like they've got an engineering gap, or established companies that feel like they've got the same, or maybe they've got an R&D portfolio they can't put money towards necessarily at the moment. They can leverage that type of program to go get solutions, engineering solutions dreamt from the start. You don't have to have a solution when you approach that type of program. You can go in with a problem, and the team will surround you with the right engineers, the right local manufacturers, regulatory approval type consultants. They've got packages of all that they will brainstorm and workshop the problem and the solution from the very start, before the engineers even start working on it. And at the end of the program, you get your very first show and tell prototype that you can then go on and approach bigger firms or funds to help you going. So state government, so in the medtech specific, I guess, type program, you've got the very large federal fund that I was talking about earlier, called the MRFF, the Medical Research Future Fund, $5 billion over 10 years. So they've split it into 20 different initiatives and programs targeted at patients, researchers, research mission, research translation and commercialisation. If you go on their website, it's quite complicated in terms of every of the 20 initiatives split into even more programs. So there's lots of areas and sort of disease-specific areas as well that are supported each round. And so that means there's about $100 million a year for split into those programs, which is quite a bit of money. In the private area, which applies to New Zealand as well, there is the MRCF, the Medical Research Commercialisation Fund. They get together about 50 medical research institutes and research hospitals as members of the fund, and they fund quite early stage startup for a sort of venture capital type firm backed by Brandon Capital. So they're a good group to approach as well, to help you, I guess, do some due diligence, but also fund your very first sort of capital raising kind of phases. And then you've got the MDPP, like I've mentioned, but in between those funds, you've also got broader non-medtech specific funds on the state level, such as the South Australian Research, Commercialisation and Startup Fund by the Liberal government, and they've got 3 different streams of funding. And for the very first time, that the local government, the state government is funding up to $1 million matched funding per project in that one. So it is still, you still need to have some kind of ratio of cash contribution with investors coming in that you can leverage and that sort of thing. It goes from, 20 grand up to $1 million, depending on which stream you apply for. And on the federal side, you've also got your Oz Industry Accelerating Commercialisation and Entrepreneur Program that's still around, funding tooling costs for devices and all kinds of commercialisation activities. So if you just look at those 5 big programs, there's quite a bit of support going around. It's just about, I think in medtech, like Jonathan alluded to, it's about collaboration. It's about having a good team to start off with, but it's about having the right partners locally or internationally to bring together, work together, and then put your best bid forward.
Just on that, I've actually got an interesting question here that kind of relates back to that in terms of, I think in some ways our audience today is the entrepreneurs and the startups. But I've got a question from Fatima here, who's asking that other than entrepreneurship, are there other opportunities to be involved in this? For example, providing consultancy in medical devices, as well as healthcare sectors, and working with the entrepreneurs in either or both universities? Good question.
So being a consultant into the sector, you mean? Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities. So there are a lot of clinicians that have got the very best ideas for the next medical device that they need in their practice. Some of them are very coachable and they end up being great entrepreneurs. Some of them do need help because they've got the day job of doing surgery all day long every day, and they want to continue doing that, and they do need the support of more sort of business consultants or medtech consultants that have done it before, especially around designing clinical trials so that it meets the requirements of regulatory approval and your marketing type tasks that Jonathan was talking about earlier. So they need that kind of skill that to hire into their startup, into their companies or projects. I would say yes.
Yeah. That's great, thank you. And then I've got a question here about what are the things to consider in the recipe for success in the commercialisation of these medical technologies?
If the medical device partnering program has taught me one thing, is that in product development for medtech, it's pointless not to consider everything required to launch to market from day one. If you don't consider the clinical champion that you actually need endorsement for, no one's going to listen to you later on, even though the entity buying those devices or technologies might be hospitals. If the surgeons that are the key opinion leaders in that field don't want it, you'll never sell it. So that was one of the things that you need to make sure that you're partnering with the people that their voice matters. So it's important to engage them from day one in terms of product specification, what features that they value more, and they might have come across devices that are already on the market that does the trick, or you need to and reprioritize the minimal viable product and how it needs to look like. Very often we had people come to us with a product with 3 features that they thought was providing a competitive edge, and then we workshopped it and the surgeons came up within the workshop with a totally different product that will meet their needs better. So that's invaluable. You're saving a lot of money doing that, and not patent too early as well. Patent when you've eliminated all the technical risk in the very early stage of design and engineering, and ensuring that you are engaging with hospital administrators as well that are aware of budgets. So very often when we were talking about surgical instruments, they would come in and say, well, we've got budget for reusable instrumentation in that field, so it needs to be made out of something we can sterilise and reuse rather than disposable. And in some other cases, it was the opposite. So it depends on what field. And if you can imagine, if you make the wrong decision 2 years into the project, you'd be wasting a lot of time and money. So it's good to understand that sort of thing from the beginning. And in medtech, the other thing that many of us learned the hard way is reimbursement considerations as well. So, you know, there's sometimes some things that, despite it's saving money and time in an operating theatre, it doesn't mean that the reimbursement ratio is very attractive for the clinicians and the surgeons, and therefore it might not be taken up. As sad as this sounds, the health economics and the reimbursement for the clinicians is important to consider sometimes.
Yeah, look, some great insights there. And I've, as you've been talking, I've been seeing segues that go nicely to Jamie in international markets and then nicely over to Anya in that commercialisation space. But my instinct is actually to move to Anya, because we're very much talking about how it is that you connect up the right organisations and you pave the way. And so, Anya, I have a question for you, which is that how does the Canterbury DHB work with health tech innovators, and what are the types of innovations that Via Innovations is currently working with?
Okay, so we typically have three types of innovators and innovations we work with. I'm going to call them inside out, co-design, and outside in. And following on from your earlier comment, Olivia, you know, we're excited to see the Canterbury ThincLab program, which looks like it could be a great pathway to help some of our ventures, especially those with Australasian reach or potential for Australasian reach through the Adelaide partnership. And so inside out, I guess we're the first port of contact for employees who have created new IP in the course of their work. And we help clarify IP ownership and then work with them to understand their goals and plans that they might have for that innovation. And if they decide they want to work with Via Innovations, then we can assist them with validation plans, connections to industry, some initial proof of concept funding, and if there's commercial potential beyond the CDHB and where they're a good fit for the hub, New Zealand Health Innovation Hub, we sponsor further shaping through that path to licensing or spin-out company trajectories. But in addition to being a pathway for pre-seed innovations, the hub's sort of also there as a special purpose vehicle for joint venturing innovations, and there's a bit of joint venturing kind of approach through that co-design that happens. I thought I'd give you a couple of examples of each of those inside out, co-design and outside in. So Hartwell Simulation, that's a vital signs simulation system for training theatre teams, first responder teams, and for testing new workflow options. For example, when new procedures and processes had to be thought out and tested for COVID when that came in. So it uses immersive and authentic real-time simulation techniques, and that was developed by a CDHB anaesthetist and a CDHB medical physics engineer in collaboration with an Australian biomedical test company, Domotechnica. And they've currently got beta sales happening in Australia and New Zealand. So that was a really good inside out. And we've also got another one called Wayfind, which is a decision support tool that guides clinicians through evidence-based health pathways. So if you presented a GP or a hospital with chest pain, Wayfind can help guide the clinician through the chest pain pathway in real time. And as that database of inputs increases, they'll be able to deliver real-time insights into red flags, risk categorization, and recommending actions using predictive analytics. So that team recently awarded a Spark Digital Health Innovation Award for projects that show improved health outcomes from applying AI and machine learning in health. And for the Australians, it Spark's one of our main mobile telecoms companies here in New Zealand. As a co-design example, another IT company, Sense Medical, with clinical involvement inside it, plus CDHB, developed a system called Cortex, which is a mobile-first point-of-care solution that enables clinical teams to access or order test results, add tasks to clinical workflows or complete them, all without leaving the patient's bedside. And, you know, this has been 5 years of co-development, so just reiterating how long things in health care can take. And they've just passed their millionth clinical note, and that's one that has potential for expansion beyond the CDHB. And for a couple of outside-in examples, one of those is MedSelf. So this is a local startup company that actually came through the University of Canterbury entrepreneurship program, and they reprocess non-invasive single-use disposables to help divert medical waste from landfill and to help make the health dollar stretch further. And so while reprocessing is more common internationally, MedSelf are breaking new ground here in New Zealand, and that means that detailed planning, robust testing to ensure appropriate safety, quality and performance standards can be met. And in a COVID environment, it's also adding resilience into the local supply chain. So after a successful pilot, MedSelf now have a supply contract with CDHB for their first reprocessed device, and that's a really good example there. And another example of the outside in is a young company called Blue Mirror, and they pivoted at the outbreak of COVID to apply their technical expertise into a virtual buddy for the PPE. I'm sure everyone knows what PPE is now, to help that donning and doffing process, so that it's a virtual mirror with customizable programs so that staff can put on and take off PPE safely. And it incorporates AI that checks the compliance and provides feedback while you're doing that. And we're currently running that as a trial in a teaching setting through the simulation centre. So a hospital-like setting where we can de-risk testing that to compare compliance and confidence levels using this clever app compared to a human buddy. So that's some examples of what we're working with.
Great examples there, and thanks for sharing the kind of the practicalness of what you're working on, so we can get a handle on what it actually is. It occurs to me that it's worth mentioning that the Canterbury DHB is definitely a leader in innovation in New Zealand. And even when you mention things like simulated environments, they really are fostering and pushing through innovative technology and innovative thinking. So you're in a pretty cool environment where you are.
Oh yes, it's great.
But then, you know, that's sort of couched by the fact that it's still a public sector environment. And if any one of us, I'm sure most of us have had the experience of working in public sector versus private sector, they can be quite different. And so I'm really interested in your thoughts, Anya, on the biggest differences, given that you've had similar experiences in your work, but in those environments, and the technology incubator background that you have, and then moving into this public sector, so this public healthcare environment.
Okay, so over my 9 months, I've got a top 8 so far, and obviously these are personal opinion, but I guess the first one is a focus on innovation by co-design and collaboration. And I think what Aisha was talking around that, the experts, the clinical champions, that need has to be a co-design approach is really a positive. And many of our successful implementations are based on that approach, and that's typically our MO in via innovations is a collaborative or co-design kind of approach. And this collaborative approach extends ecosystem-wise into Te Papahora Health Precinct, which is a Canterbury initiative between University of Canterbury and Otago, the ARA Institute, which is part of their tertiary is the nursing training, and also the CDHB, and that's there to integrate world-class healthcare research and innovation, education and industry networks. My second one, I guess, is that success is defined differently, and that the culture and vocabulary is very different. So improving healthcare at a reasonable return on investment kind of flavour, rather than a 10x multiple within 5 years strategy. You know, there's quite it's perceived differently inside public healthcare, and that lack of comfort with typical commercialisation sector language, which I've really had to pull back on. So killing an idea and failing fast do not gel well in this sector. And I think that difference in criteria and language is not that good a fit with traditional investment entities, but I think it really presents a real opportunity to develop a new model and investor profile in that sector. My third one would be a real focus on health equity in New Zealand. So equity in terms of recognising that different people with different levels of advantage require different approaches and resources to get equitable health outcomes. So where I came from, equity referred to how much of a stake in the company's upside you had, and not whether healthcare was accessible on an equitable basis. And I think for health tech companies, or for non-health tech companies wanting to come across into public healthcare, then that's something they really need to think about and incorporate. The fourth point is the forgiving first customer. So in a tech incubator environment, you know, one of the key shaping criteria was always finding that forgiving first customer for market entry, where mistakes and learnings could be tolerated without dire consequences. And so you started there. And healthcare, for the large part, is not that forgiving first customer. Business models aren't simple, and as both Jonathan and Aisha talked to, and then it's known for being slow and expensive. And I think two contributing factors to that are the high number of stakeholders that are necessarily involved. So this impacts on the appetite for workflow change, have to be considered across all levels, both vertical and then across all interacting activity areas before an innovation can be piloted or implemented in a hospital setting. And ensuring that there's a confidence in continuity of service once a new workflow is introduced is a key requirement. And the other one would be that risk appetite that adds barriers to entry. So DHBs have a very low appetite for risk necessarily on a number of fronts, and that's, you know, quality, safety compliance, financial, data security, privacy, patient consents, regulations, reputational impact. You know, any breach or misstep can have highly adverse impacts on the patients, the staff and the entities. And I know for startups that blue chip or reputable reference site endorsement is key. But don't expect it will come easy in this sector. There has to be strong evidence-based results to support that. Also, very limited discretionary funds for innovation in the DHB sector. So there are limited options for accessing government and pre-seed grants and commercial expertise and support developing to investor-ready status. And that's something that NZHIH, the hub, is leading the way to help address, but it's really exciting to see the ThincLab partnership bringing complementary options and capability to these channels, especially in our local ecosystem. And my last one would just be that venture CEOs generally have to be acquired. And in that respect, it's very much like my experience in the tech incubator model, whereas, of course, founder incubator models have less of a challenge there. But typically clinicians, as Aisha said, I think, typically clinicians and healthcare workers look to continue with their specialist calling. And so at some stage you have to find external resources and fund them to grow a venture. And finding that right skill set and cultural fit can be quite a challenge. But the stronger the local eco health system becomes, the easier that will become. So excited to see what you're doing.
That's great. Thank you, Anya. Absolutely reminds me that while we've got this connectivity in our regions, imagine what we can do if we actually connect up beyond the regions. The opportunities are really, really exciting. I have got a question sitting here from our Q&A that I'm just going to hold over to the end, just because I'd really like to hear from Jamie. And then we'll bring through that question. I think it was from Adam. So hold the phones, Adam. Yeah, it was Adam. I have got your question here ready for the panel afterward. But Jamie, if we can tune into yourself and sort of bring this back to business a little bit, and these international markets and crossing those barriers. You mentioned earlier that I think it was 90-something, could it have been 99? 90-something% of your sales are international. So please do tell us what's different about TASKA's international market strategy.
Well, I'd like to thank my fellow panelists for a start for literally pulling the eyes out of my response to this question already. Look, I think Anya raised a really interesting point, and that was that we've just been bombarded by the way that startups are supposed to operate and, you know, scale quickly and fail quick, all that type of stuff. This health tech is not, you know, particularly medtech, it's not a SaaS market, it's a regulated market. We're stepping into a world of really strong relationships. The reimbursement cycles, funding cycles, a complicated purchasing process as well. I think when you're talking about these early stage medtech type initiatives, you might as well take that playbook and just throw it out the window for a start. You know, sure, there's regular business processes and business disciplines that still apply, but really the marketing side of things has just been such a challenge for us. You know, I know that there's going to be other initiatives around, you know, I'll talk class 1, class 2, class 3 medical devices. We're only class 1, which means that we've allowed to, you know, we've got far less regulatory hurdles to enter into market. And in fact, in our world, there's actually a carve out for prosthetics as well. They're almost considered an external device, so, you know, they're nice to have in some ways. So there's been regulatory carve outs for us in that US market, which has been the biggest one for us. So for us, I know it sounds a little weird or a little bit ambitious, but for us as a New Zealand company wanting to build that company and get to a sustainable point, it has been the US for us. Seems audacious, but it's not, because that's actually where that regulatory carve-out really suited us and allowed us to make that name. I mean, gee, if there's a reference market that you want with a medtech product, it's the US. It is applicable elsewhere. At least it gets the door opened. But you know, just going back to understanding the stakeholders in this industry as well. I mean, for us, it really is a B to B to C to F in there somewhere as well. You know, we're dealing with clinicians, we're dealing with distributors, we're dealing with funders, we're dealing with government reimbursement cycles, we're dealing with customers as well. So for us, that marketing exercise for us has become the most important part of the business. And it's also disproportionately expensive as well, because we've got so many touch points with so many major stakeholders. And then on top of that, we're throwing in international expansion as well. So it is really difficult. You know, the thing that we've done differently, and I hesitate to say this, but the thing that we've done differently is go back to an old distribution model. I mean, that's been the way that we've been able to leverage existing relationships overseas, leverage language barriers. I mean, that's been a major for us as well. So selling through those distributors, if you can get a good one like we did in the US, then you're away. If you get a bad one, then that's just delayed things even more. And I think we all have heard this tales of trying to unwind distribution agreements in European territories. It's fraught with trouble. So really for us, I'd love to say that we've been incredibly clever about our strategy. We haven't actually. We've found a lot of the stuff out by accident, and it's worked well for us. Those accidents have provided us a little bit of a basis to start looking or start understanding what actually does and doesn't work in those other markets as well. So yeah, our international marketing strategy, what's different about it? It's piecemeal and it's reactive, but we haven't made too many mistakes just yet, which has been pretty good.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, it does reflect the nature of business, which is that there's so many learnings along the way. And I appreciate your frankness about that. You know, you haven't got the secret method, but what the secret method is sticking to it. And potentially if something, you know, isn't broken, then don't try and fix it. Just go with an old model that suits. There's a bit of a sort of a future focus here as well, Jamie, you know, and people are talking about the fact that it takes 5 years to even get into market with all the research and all of the technology, let alone the regulation. So if we were to look ahead, how do you see TASKA expanding over the next 5 years? What comes next?
We're in a really nice position that we've got the product is really a market leading product and the margins are pretty high on it, and the company is now cash flow positive as well. And once you hit that point, it just changes everything. All of a sudden, we're not looking for, you know, co-funding. We're co-funding with, you know, cash flow basically. We're matching stuff from our own cash flow. It means that you haven't got a CE and a CFO that are just constantly distracted capital raising. All of a sudden people want to be involved with the company as well. It's just a completely different space for us. You know, geographical expansion for us is something that's going to be the major thing for us. We have opened up a number of quite major markets: France, Germany, US. I mean, those are really big ones for us at the moment. Every time we go into another geography or another territory, there is just a lot of work to be done. So it's not necessarily the cash expense there for us, but it's growing the company, it's getting a presence in market, it's all that type of stuff, which is really quite challenging to do, particularly when we can't even set foot in those other countries at the moment. It's tough. We will also be doing a lot more R&D. You know, we've had to back ourselves in the R&D that we have been undertaking so far was going to end up with some sort of a commercial output. It has. We've been lucky on that side of things. We can probably get a better commercial result for that existing technology, but what it has done is to set up that cash flow to allow us to start being a whole lot more aggressive about our own R&D pipeline. In fact, aggressive to the point that we can actually have a look at what is quite a fragmented medical device or medtech industry out there and look at potential, you know, small acquisitions here and there to be able to complement that existing product set. So for us, you know, growth is going to be literally everywhere. The most distracting thing for the business is going to be opening up those new geographies though.
Just on that, and then I'd also welcome our audience to submit any questions. We've sort of got about 5-10 minutes left, but I can throw those in at the end. But just on that, Jamie, and also kind of linking back to why we're all here today, which is activating these networks and these channels, what are some of the kind of the doorways that are being held open for you, whether it be that Germany's got a relationship with Luxembourg or the US distributors got some relationships? What is it that kind of facilitates or expedites that process to get to the next one that you're seeing?
Well, if anybody here has dealt in Germany, they'll realise that doors aren't opened that easily or quickly or voluntarily. The US market for us, like I say, we've got a fantastic distributor over there. They have opened up doors for us into the R&D space in the US. We found that actually when we start getting involved with that, in fact, maybe here's a tip, as soon as you start getting involved in that R&D space over there in the US market, then that does flow down to commercial benefit elsewhere, whether it's just, you know, company reputation or whatever else. It seems as though those companies which are involved in R&D in the US, that becomes a bit of a door opener for us. Yeah, look, we have very limited resources, so it really has come down to just choosing those right partners overseas for us. You know, we've made some good choices. We have made a bad choice as well, and that's been incredibly difficult to deal with. It stops you in those markets essentially. So I wouldn't say that we've got it right all the time, but you know, when you do get them right, you are looking for more than just somebody to shift product. When you're looking for those partners overseas, you really need somebody to be your de facto eyes and ears on the ground.
That's great, thank you. I do have just the one question that's come through, so unless something else comes through, I'm going to put that up for grabs, and then I'll just sort of wrap up by trying to make sure that people who are in our audience today know how to reconnect in either to our Canterbury network or our Adelaide network, and the best ways to people that feel that they can reach out after this program. So this is an interesting one, and it's pretty current, and it's not really related to devices, but I think it's still very relevant for where we are today, and particularly with Australia and New Zealand as we experience not quite the surge that Trump suggested, but a surge of sorts with COVID. And so Adam Hutchinson has asked the panel about the fact that we've seen a demand on mental health services, such as anxiety, grow around 300% since COVID and lockdown. How big does everyone view this problem to be, and perhaps any thoughts on how this sector can tackle things as such? I'll take anyone. Jonathan.
The answer, I didn't know if there's a signed answerer for these things, but this issue is something that I've been thinking about and is close to my heart, and I am very, very dismayed that many places in Australia and New Zealand, for example, particularly Melbourne in Australia, is going through this terrible time with so much of a lockdown that people are actually really suffering. Suicide, the things people don't want to talk about, anxiety, they're all skyrocketing during this situation. And I think it is a very big problem, and it's also an indicative of, like, it's almost like a wake-up call for society to say, like, okay, we're doing things we need to do because we have to without thinking about it. And when do we ever get together as society and say, stop everything, just stop, and work out how we can make it a better society for people? How do we, I mean, we know we need to be safe from the disease, and we know we need to do things in a proper way, but the fact that people feel socially isolated and feel they aren't cared for, or they feel that they're having real morale difficulties, I mean, those things are really to do with, you know, the workplace and the types of friendships that have been allowed to develop because of the society we live in is so hectic that, you know, so many things that, and I don't pretend to know the answer to any of those things, those social things, probably really deep and hard to identify and really in the subtext of what's going on. But at some point we need to kind of get together as the world society, like together as the world, and work out what those, how do we make society a better place to live, and so that it's more pleasant, rather than always, you know, do more things and hectic things that don't always mean anything, especially if it's at the expense of real human things like living and having fun. That's like a word that you're not even allowed to say. You know, how do you get those things that, you know, so that's my feeling about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure there isn't anyone on this panel, let alone and further reaches, who would suggest that this is an absolutely critical, important that we look at this as, you know, one of the greatest health issues. But Jamie or Aisha, we've lost Anya as she had to dash another meeting, but do you have any comment on how it might be that innovators and commercialisation groups in this space can make a change in this area?
During COVID, we've talked about it a lot, and I think it was a national effort. The National Innovation Games was a very sort of long day sort of hackathon that happened earlier in May, and one of the topics and themes was mental health during COVID. So, and the solutions that a lot of the students and mentors came up with were community-based solutions. So, rather than talking about, grant funding around mental health or putting more pressure on existing mental health authorities or agencies, it was more about making sure that within small communities, within a few streets or groups that do like similar things and do similar things, get together and either do it online or drop off things for each other. So any sort of community-based activity or gesture that you can do for people who can't get out and get, it was all around trying to get groceries for people who have disabilities and can't get there, and then when they do get there, there's no toilet paper and that sort of thing. So just trying to find out who needs help and stay linked up in small sort of chat rooms or and by dropping off things for each other and do fun things together. Yeah, art I think was one of them, doing a lot of art in the front yard and that sort of thing. So just try to cheer people up with nice gestures, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to look at it, Aisha. And of course, there's a double impact there, where the people who are actually in, the more obvious need are having their needs met, and then people who are looking to contribute to a greater impact are also having their needs met. So it's, there's some substantial impact there. Jamie, did you have anything to add before we wrap up on that note?
Look, I think that we're all in the medtech space, all in the medical space, and I think that that mental health is something which is never too far away from what we're doing in our core business. I mean, from our perspective, the mental health aspect of patients after an amputation is really, really significant. In fact, so much so that I didn't even realise how significant this was before taking on this role. It's a massive thing. I'd love to be able to do something there, absolutely, but I'm really not qualified to be able to do that. So, I think that it's just an area which really hasn't been explored. It hasn't been, well, perhaps even acknowledged in some circles actually as being a thing. But that is changing. It's certainly changing here in New Zealand. I hope it is in Australia as well, because I do think it is such a massive part to, that rehabilitation process, or long-term rehabilitation anyway.
Which is great, because I guess what I'm hearing again is that this does resonate for everybody, and perhaps it's a bit of a call to action where appropriate and where we can, as leaders in this industry, to just be bringing these conversations around the table and making sure that along with the devices and the innovation, there's the human aspect. Obviously, Jamie and Jonathan, with your businesses, there is very much a human aspect to the technology that you're developing. So maybe we just take it on ourselves to all have that as part of the thinking when we're doing the great work that we do. But we must wrap it up. I'm sure we could continue to talk, but we are on a time limit. So I'd really like to thank the panellists for bringing yourselves, your thoughts, your insights, your openness to sharing today. Also the respective leaders of the entrepreneurship departments in both the unis. Great to officially launch the program and see, we're just at the start, right, about how these partnerships can do some cool stuff. I would encourage people to reach out either to the Adelaide ThincLab or Canterbury. There may be an opportunity for us to send something through to the emails that were submitted when you registered, but obviously there's websites and what have you, so just Dr. Google will sort you right out there. You'll be able to find us pretty easily. And very accessible, available organisations. Just reach out to any of the directors or the program managers. They're very, very happy to talk. So on that note, just wishing everyone a great rest of the day. Adelaide, enjoy the rest of your morning. New Zealand, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care of each other, and we'll really look forward to the next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.